welcome to the Sunday morning Bible study, College Avenue Church of Christ. I know we've got a few visitors. The Presleys have family in, and we've got Samantha visiting from Georgia, and a few other visitors, Kristen's mom. So we're happy to see everyone. If you do not have one of today's books to study, visitors, guests, if you don't have one of our books, we have some extra ones out on the table in the lobby, so it looks like this. And if some of the ushers, anyone need a book for this morning? I will quickly go over our prayer list. Obviously, I'm not Caleb, and I'll get to that here momentarily. But the entire Cochran family is under the weather right now with a bacterial infection. They're on antibiotics, but they're not doing as well as they would like to be, but hopefully they will be back with us again. So I'm filling in for Caleb, so be nice, because this was short notice. But prayers of thanksgiving. Diana Merritt Harden received great news from her doctor. He believes he was able to remove all the cancer during her surgery, and no further treatment will be needed, but continue to pray for Diana and her safety and well-being. Also, prayers of healing. Chad Trott continues to recover in Birmingham. He had some extensive surgery this past week, and he was off the ventilator, alert and responsive. If you're on Facebook, you may have seen the picture of Chad and Jennifer. So he is progressing well, but he is still a long way from full recovery, so continue to pray for him. Elizabeth Caldwell's 92-year-old sister had hip replacement and arm surgery last week after a fall a few days prior. Beatrice Tyndall, continue to pray for her. Russ will be having knee replacement surgery this Thursday, April 29th, so pray for Russ and for his nurse, Lou. Bonnie Keeler, who visits with us quite regularly, one of our community members, is having some serious eye issues, and so pray for her, as well as the friend who is attending to her right now and housing her. Glenda Frazier is scheduled for surgery this Friday the 30th at Flowers Hospital in Dothan for breast cancer. Johnny Dunaway will be having a heart cath on Tuesday, and then depending on his results, his knee replacement surgery will be scheduled after that. And then Larry Boots came in Wednesday night and requested prayers of the congregation. He's visited with us in the past as he's trying to get his life back in line and back on track. Also, Mark updated me on Miss Maxine, his mom's condition. She's about the same. Continue to pray for her as she deals with the effects of dementia and just the aging process. And then prayers of comfort. Mason Streetman's brother-in-law, Richard Johnston, passed away at his home in Phoenix City last Wednesday night. So pray for the Streetman, the Ellis, Alexander families during this loss. And then individual who's well known to many in this congregation, Jared English, passed away last weekend after a automobile accident in Nashville, Tennessee. And please pray for him and for his family during this time of unexpected loss. Are there any other additions to our prayer list before we begin? If not, I'm going to ask Mark Jennings to guide our minds in prayer.
Heavenly Father, we're so thankful for this beautiful day to give us and come together and study for your word and sing beautiful hymns of praise to you. Thank you for the fellowship. We've had many mentions this morning. We want to continue to lift up prayer to you. We'd like to thank you for answering prayers with Diana. With work that she's had. We're also mindful of those who are still struggling with various problems, such as Chad.
Amen. And as I mentioned, we have a number of visitors with us today, so we're going to briefly review the material over the past 3 weeks to bring everyone up to speed. We've been studying spiritual formation with a study guide that Caleb, our minister, put together. What was one of the first things that we discussed in relationship to spiritual formation in our very first class 3 weeks ago? What did we say about spirit? We said a lot about spirit, didn't we? I guess I need to ask him more specific. The word spirit is the word pneuma and rorak in pneuma in Greek and rorak in Hebrew, and it means breath, life, wind, spirit. But what do we say about spiritual formation in particular?
We're going to be formed by something, one way or another.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. Exactly. We all have spirit, right? The first gift that God gave to man over in Genesis chapter 2, verse 7, the Lord God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils either the breath of life or the spirit of life, depending on your translation. So the first thing that he gave to mankind, not just his people, not just the Israelites, not just Christians, but all mankind, is spirit, which, is breath, which is life, right? And as Rachel said, we all have some form of spiritual formation in our life. And the question is that spiritual formation conforming with God's intent for us in terms of what we can, living up to our highest expectations or His highest expectations for us, or will it be, something that falls short of what He created us for? Does that make sense? It made sense in my head. I don't know if it made sense coming out of my mouth. We always fall short, Richard, right? We always fail to make the mark. But the whole idea behind spiritual formation for us as Christians is what? It's not a process where we necessarily reach the end state. It's a discipline where we have to commit ourselves, and it's a deliberate action. And as I was thinking, preparing for this lesson, we talked about the different words for spirit in both the Hebrew and the Greek, but we really didn't deal with the idea of spiritual. So we're talking about spiritual formation, right? Have any of you ever heard someone say, or somebody post to social media, "I'm spiritual, I'm just not religious"? You've heard that, Nakia? The devil likes for us to think that we're spiritual but not religious. Can we separate our spiritual well-being and our spiritual life from the pattern of religion that God has provided for us? If we say, "I'm spiritual, I get my spiritual energy from being out in nature," is that something in lieu of joining together as a body or a family of like-minded believers? J.M.?
There's a definition of spiritual.
And what is the definition of spiritual? How do we define spiritual? Because I think that's a crucial understanding as we continue, this study on spiritual formation. What does it mean to be spiritual? In the common sense, but also in the biblical sense. God is spirit.
I think we could say it's your attitude.
It's your attitude, and we talked about this when we were defining spirit in the past 2 weeks. It's your attitude, but it's so much more than your attitude. I agree completely, Ms. Pat. It is your attitude, but when we talk about spirit as breath and breath as life, it is, and that's why what we talk about today in relationship to the heart is so important. It is our attitude, it's our conscience, it's our consciousness, it's our morals, it's our ethics. All of those, I think we try to kind of separate these concepts. But when we talk about spiritual, pneumatikatos, when we talk, I'm sorry, just a second. Let me try to finish that thought before it leaves me. When we talk about spiritual, we have to understand that that is all encompassing of the mind, the body, the soul, and the heart, right? Joel and then Rachel.
So I was talking with Caleb a couple of weeks ago with background in chemistry, which I've got some other papers here too. But we use the term spirit a lot in chemistry, spirit of alcohol, and it's an essence of the pure thing. It's not the pure thing, but it is an essence of it that we can rapidly identify a original compound based on the spirit of whatever. Again, example, a lot of times is probably all related to it. There is a product which is chemically is an ester, which is what gives aroma to a lot of things. Most of us remember these chewy things called bananas. And when you chew into those, there's a distinct aroma of bananas. It's artificial, but it still reminds us of banana. And the same thing with a lot of things. So, to your point, spiritually, we should, as Christians, be reminding of God in our lives so that we have the spirituality back.
Great point, Joel. So what I'm hearing you say is that spirit is kind of the essence of something. And the essence that all humankind has been given is the essence of God. The breath of life, that initial gift that God gave to humanity at the dawn of time. The question is it a pure essence? Is it, something that reflects God in what we do, which is what He made us for? Or is it something that has been, or is it a, to use the analogy, is it a chemical that's been tainted by something that weakens its influence, or that actually negates or nullifies or neutralizes its influence? Does it glorify God? Exactly. And that's the whole point. When we talk about it, why did God make man? We talked about this Wednesday night a couple of weeks ago, but why did God make man? From Acts 17. To seek Him, right? To seek Him because He gave us something that He wants us to bring back, which is this Spirit. And He, it's the parable of the good steward. He invested a spirit in us, and He expects us to return that to Him with value added, if that makes sense. Or not even necessarily value added, but the idea that it is the purest form of what He gave us. That it hasn't been cut with any other kind of interfering or neutralizing or corrupting condition. Rachel?
I was just going to say that we all have spirit, but it's what we should choose to yield to. Do I yield or submit to God, my spirit to God, or do I yield to my desires? So I think it's about what we're going to yield to that really defines exactly what our spirit's going to be.
Sure. What we are going to allow to influence our spirit, right? So that's the first part of our review. We haven't even gotten into the class yet, so hold on. Yes?
One thing I think too is as Christians, I feel like we have a constant battle on the inside between our human spirit and our God spirit. And there are days that I can look back into my day and think, I feel like I glorified God today. Then there are other days that I can look back and think, I yielded to that human spirit way more.
Sure.
I lost some temper, I was unkind to somebody or whatever. And I feel like as long as we keep our eyes on the prize and know that every day we're to walk more and be closer like Jesus and try to glorify God,
knowing that we are going to fall short, but that we're still striving every day to be more like Jesus in the days to come. And I think, and we never have arrived, I think it's a constant journey to be more in tune with the Spirit of God than being in tune with our human nature.
And that makes perfect sense, and it kind of goes with what Richard was saying. The more we align ourselves with God, the more we practice this striving. I think you used that term, but the idea of the discipline, the deliberate application of our mental faculties, our moral faculties, our emotional faculties to do what God made us for, which is to live in a fashion that will draw us to Him, not push us away from Him. The more we do that, the easier it becomes. And I think we all struggle with that, human spirit versus God spirit. And that's the key. I got to look at it because pneumatikos is the Greek word, and it's the idea of spiritual things. So it's the idea of focusing on the external, God, not focusing on the sensual, meaning the things that appeal to our senses, right? Absolutely, Richard. J.M.?
Apparently there's a school of thought on humanistic spirituality. I just looked it up. I mean, there's a realm of information that's available on humanistic spirituality. When somebody says, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious, what they're saying is, I'm humanistically spiritual. And so, I'll just throw this out here. For the psychologically oriented, humanistic spirituality encourages us to develop practices that emphasize being sensitive to feelings where we often remain stuck. Significant focus is placed on neutral witnessing and on cultivating essential qualities such as compassion, strength, receptivity, and inner peace. For those that are more spiritual, humanistic spirituality is a form of spiritual psychology that encourages us to look more closely at our egos and the ways we may be unwittingly creating harm. We can mistakenly believe we've spiritually arrived and not recognize that our humanness is here to stay. None of that's got anything to do with God.
Sure. And this goes back to our discussion both in our Wednesday night class a couple of weeks ago, Purpose, Direction, and Motivation, but our discussion on the idea that God made us with a specific purpose, which is to seek Him. Everyone in this auditorium and everyone outside this auditorium has, and there was a song that was out probably 2 decades ago, but talking about the fact that everyone has a God-shaped hole. God created us with a need, an emotional, a psychological, and a spiritual need to find the right relationship with Him. And many people seek that through many different methods. And one of the things that's interesting to me with it is that within the past 10 to 15 years, there's been this huge movement that J.M. is talking about in regard to humanism, that man is the measure of all things, that man, that there is no God. It's all about, all about the individual and the individual's needs. The idea, though, that humanists have begun to realize the value of some of the things that we know the value of already, right? Which is the idea of fellowship, the idea of ritual, the idea of things that bind us together, right? And so, they're grasping at trying to recreate what we have naturally and organically as Christians. They're trying to, create something out of the air to replicate. Sure. So, spirit, the idea of our spiritualness is, where are we focused? Are we focused on ourselves? Are we focused on our human spirit? Or are we focused on God and the Spirit that fills us all with life? And how do we become even more focused as Christians? And how do we, and it's great if we're spiritual, but if we're not sharing our spirituality with others, then we're arguably holding the line, but we're not making any advance. Tim?
Sometimes we refer to people with an evil spirit, polar opposite of what we're talking about. And they didn't get to be that way by our reputation by being passive. They were working somehow to gain that reputation. We have, and God sure had to work at being spiritual.
Great point, Tim. And the reality, when we break that down to the ultimate level, the formation of our spirit, which is that is a big part of not only how we spend our life here, but where we spend our life in eternity. As we develop our spirit, I apologize, that idea just completely left my mind.
It's old age.
It is old age. It's
That's what that is, Clark.
something that Tim said. Tim, what was I going to respond to you? It'll come back to me. So let's move along. So we said that as we are studying the Spirit, we kind of used a framework, right? We used the framework of the heart, the soul, the mind, and the strength, right? And also include the body. So now let's talk about heart. If I said Addison Hudson, who, by the way, signed to play football at Faulkner this week, if I said Addison Hudson was out there on the football field and he played with a lot of heart, what does that mean? We're transitioning from the review into today's lesson. He gave it his all, right? If we're going to distill it down to one word, he persevered. He fought through the hard times. He overcame the obstacles. He turned obstacles, like we talk about, in relationship to how we deal with COVID as a congregation. He turned obstacles into opportunities, right? So, had a lot of heart. If I said someone lost heart, what would be a synonym for losing heart?
Giving up.
Giving up, right? Faltering or failing, fainting. What if I said, the first 2 times Melody broke up with me, I was brokenhearted. She didn't break up with me. I just made that up. What does that mean? If someone is brokenhearted, that they're sad, right? Or how about this one? This is even better. He or she died of a broken heart. Have y'all ever heard that term? So our heart seems like it's pretty important, in just day-to-day activities. What do I mean when I say Pharaoh during the time of Moses was hard-hearted? Oh, no, come on. He was stubborn or cruel, right? He was, what about someone wore their heart on their sleeve? What does that mean? Sensitive. Tender-hearted, right? Fragile, maybe, right? And what about, we said hard-hearted, how about cold-hearted? They don't care, right? They're uncaring. So we've got this concept that's in our kind of contemporary vernacular, but it means so many different things. So when I say heart, just from a contemporary standpoint, or even from a biblical standpoint, what does that mean? What does it mean to you?
The heart's the center. If your anatomy. If it doesn't beat, you don't live.
Right. It is the center of physical life, right? There are a great many traumatic brain injuries that someone can suffer where their body will continue to function indefinitely. But you know, they aren't conscious in the sense of, you know, interacting with the world around them, right? So you can't live without your brain, obviously, but there's a what? But there is, you know, the essence. You know, why is it that as I've mentioned already, Genesis chapter 2, you know, why is it that God began the process with breath? Because, you know, we know the heart does what? Physiologically. It pumps oxygen to all, you know, the brain can't live without the heart, just like the heart can't live without the brain. So I think as we're studying, you know, spirit and mind and heart and soul, we got to be careful that we're not trying to make too strong a distinction between those, because when we think about our physiological body, all of those are components of our well-being. And so, you know, all of these spiritual characteristics or spiritual attributes, spiritual elements are all interlocked. You know, it's not like we can have spirit without heart and be pleasing to God, or we can have, you know, spirit without our body and be pleasing to God. Nathan, you had your hand up?
Oh, yeah. I was going to say, Jesus said that a lot of the lusts of the flesh come from the heart, originate from the heart, like sensualities and murder and stuff like that. So it's an origination of how we operate comes from the heart, and then turns into action, you know, eventually. So it'd be like the heart would be kind of like what the military would call like your standard operating procedure.
Okay.
You know, it would be what shapes your standard operating procedure. You know, how your character, like integrity and all that, is what your heart sort of emulates. But in Galatians 5, we're told to crucify the flesh like Jesus died on the cross, you know, and put to death all those lusts of the flesh, is what Galatians 5. So Galatians 5 would probably answer a lot of these questions.
Sure, great point, Nathan. And you know, and so the term heart is used 1,000 times in the Old and New Testament, and it is the most common physiological reference in the Bible in terms of, you know, eyes, ears, hands, feet. This, you know, the heart is the centerpiece of God's revelation about, you know, man and his physical body, but also his spiritual nature. Richard?
When I got baptized up there into this church, I got a brand new heart. I used to be a pretty rough individual. You know, I was a real rough individual.
And
I was white, and I did a lot of white.
we all, you know, as we reflect back on that moment, you know, for me it was many years ago, but it wasn't only spiritually transformational, but it was mentally transformational. I felt like a new person. I felt like, you know, that God held me, but God was preparing to use me, you know, to His.
Like I tell people all the time, just going to church and you get it. And if you don't know the Bible, you're just born. You know, you can't preach the gospel and help share the gospel if you don't know it. And there's a lot of bad stuff out there.
Sure. A lot of things that are trying to turn our heart away from God. So any other thoughts? So the reference I looked up said that it is, as J.M. said, it is the center of the body. You know, in terms of physiologically, it's placed, you know, right in the center of our thorax, and it is protected by the ribs. You know, it is vital God made us, God formed us with the heart at the center of our being, and I don't think that's accidental or incidental. I mean, there's obviously some significant biological, physiological reasons for that, but also I think it reminds us, that it reminds us of that distinction that we have as creatures created in God's likeness, right? And I'm not saying that, God has a heart, a physical heart in the center of his chest. I'm saying that spiritually, we are formed in a fashion as unto him. So, yes, Rachel.
And I'm asking the class, would you say that maybe the heart is the center of emotion? That's where our emotional seat is when it, with the references in the Bible. And by that emotion, we're motivated to action. If we love God, we're motivated to serve God. If I hate mankind, then I'm going to do cruel things to mankind. So, I don't know, I may be wrong in thinking it's kind of that seat of emotion, that center there.
It's the seat of emotion, the center of emotion. In the reference that I saw this morning, it said it's our center for physical, emotional, intellectual, and moral action. Right? We understand that it's a center for if your heart stops beating, I dare you to get up and take the garbage out. It's not going to happen, right? So there's that physiological nature of it. But like Rachel said, there's an emotional nature as we delve into some of these scriptures that Caleb has brought forth in the study guide. There's an emotional aspect. There's an intellectual aspect to it. So it's obviously more than just, the heart that is beating within us. It says it's the seat of our mind, our emotion, our will, our conscience, and our desire.
Sometimes you make decisions, you either make them like you talk about making them with your brain or with your heart. Somebody you may say it in your brain, they don't deserve to be helped. They don't, they don't need to do this. We don't need to do this for them. And then in your heart says, you think about what Christ did for you. Even though he may not deserve that we do this for him, but by my heart, I'm going to.
So, it's the follow your heart, not your head. It's the eternal, maybe not eternal, it's the everlasting debate about, are we rational beings or are we emotional beings? Do we follow our head or do we follow our heart? Or is that a false dichotomy where can we not follow both? Right? JM, your hand?
Let's be realistic. We're talking about symbology, is what we're talking about. The heart's an organ.
Absolutely.
It will be if the brain is dead. It will be if you massage that sponge, it's going to pump blood and it's going to pump oxygen and keep your body going, and your brain can be dead. So the heart's an organ, but it's a symbol, a religious symbol of all the things we're talking about. But it's just an organ. Sin starts in the brain.
Amen.
Salvation starts in the brain. Without the brain, how can we be spiritual? How can we be forgiving? How can we be compassionate?
How can we pray?
How can we pray? How can we talk to God through prayer? How can we listen to God through reading the Bible? Without the brain, everything that we're talking about starts in our brain. The heart's a symbol because it's the center of our being. It's also the provider of life because it provides oxygen to all the rest of our organs.
Tells everything what to do.
But
And
I think our problem in our society today is society's trying to define us spiritually by the organs in our body. And that's a huge mistake. Now then, people are starting to think they're defined by the organs in our body. Well, if you make me feel good, then you love me. Well, that's got nothing to do with love. That's not how the Bible defines love. It defines it as sacrifice. That's got nothing to do with feelings. But society wants to define it that way. If I feel good, then you love me. If I don't feel good, then you don't love me. Let's get divorced. because you don't make me feel good anymore. It's this drifting away from what God intended the heart to mean in relation to what we think and what we believe, which is in our brains. And it's tragic to see society doing this. And everybody's just starving to understand this relationship between the heart and the brain. And filling in all those questions with a lot of misinformation, confusion, and tribal.
Sure. And, as for, in my recollection, this is the first time I've really ever done with Caleb's study guide an in-depth study of the heart in terms of the biblical aspects of it. But, it always amazes me, as J.M. was speaking, how, all of this ties together so well. And, we think about the spirit as, the breath, oxygen. The breath without heart is dead, right? I mean, there is no oxygen, and I'm talking about physiologically. There is no oxygen that's nourishing all the components, all the organs of the body. And I think, from a spiritual standpoint, I'll get to you in a second, Scott. From a spiritual standpoint, I think the same thing applies. But I do think that there is, as J.M. said, a great deal of confusion about the relationship. And we're going to get to Mark 17 here in a second.
I think the way we
Scott?
use the word heart, we could really just remove that because it's nothing more than a symbol, because it's obviously, it's a physical manifestation, it's a physical tissue, right? But what we're really talking about is the soul. You can, a hard heart, hard soul, broken heart, a broken soul. And that's, the heart is just an organ like anything else in my body. The soul is really what we're talking about.
The essence of our consciousness, the thing that, our spirit returns to God when we expire, when we stop breathing. Our spirit returns to God. And I don't want to anticipate Caleb's future lessons, because we're going to talk about the soul. But yeah, the heart is symbolic of so much more than just a heart, right? And we've kind of touched on that already. Joel?
I think that helps me anyway. When I think, the first thing we think of when we want spirit in the heart, we think man. But almost all the characteristics that we deal with are adjectives or transitive verbs that are used. So that puts a whole different thought process and complicates things, but that's the way we have to think about it.
No, that is a great point, Joel. And one of the things, because if we look back over in Mark chapter 12, verse 30, Christ says, "You shall love the Lord your God," and we're all familiar, most of us should be familiar with this passage, "with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength." One of the terms that I didn't use, because I didn't even think about it when we were talking about that kind of word recognition exercise that we did, but what does it mean to be half-hearted?
Double-minded.
Double-minded, not putting all of your effort into something, He raked the yard half-heartedly.
Non-committal.
Non-committal, right? Maybe waiting for something better to come along. So when Christ says, with all your heart, love the Lord your God, with all your heart, how do we know when we're doing something with all of our heart?
Put God first in all your plans and all that you do.
When you put God first in all your plans and all that you do, I heard Nathan?
You're all in.
This right here is might support what J.M. was talking about too. In this culture, it has been deceived into thinking if something hurts, it's bad. Okay? And people don't understand the value of suffering for righteousness. And when someone suffers for righteousness, they better themselves. It's just like working out your faith and growing your faith or growing your spirit is going to hurt a little. And along the process, just like working out your muscles. And but yeah, but this culture is like that we live in is like everything's got to be comfortable. If it's not comfortable, it's not right. Something's wrong, and it's just a big deception ploy. But there's another thing too, and this is talking about the heart being converted. In Psalm 19, David's like, the law of the Lord converts the heart, or the soul actually is what it's used as, is the word. So there's a conversion process. Jeremiah has the passage that says, hey, who can trust the heart? It's a complicated thing, it's bad. Well, that's talking about the heart of the natural man. But then in Hebrews, the Lord says, I'm going to write my laws on your hearts and on your minds. And then in Corinthians, it says it's a transformation process. So it's changing the heart of the natural man to the heart of Christ is what the Bible is doing. So the heart isn't always, the heart of the natural man is deceptive. And that's why people that look at this and say, hey, I have these, if things aren't comfortable, they aren't right. Well, that's coming from the heart of a natural person, natural minded. It's the flesh doesn't like pain. And, but someone that has the heart of Christ and the laws of Christ written on their heart, well, they embrace righteousness and the sufferings of righteousness. So, yeah, that's all.
Make your heart right to God.
Make your heart
Make your heart right.
Make your heart right. Okay,
Before
so
God.
I periodically, about every 6 months, I go to my cardiologist right down the street here. And every day I take metoprolol because of my weak ticker. So I'm very aware of the physiological function of my heart. How do we, or how should we check our hearts to make sure that they are fully functioning from a spiritual standpoint, you know?
The fruit of the Spirit, the list of the fruit of the Spirit,
If-
that should be growing and increasing manner in Christians.
Yeah, she's right.
And those are all the heart things.
Absolutely.
And it doesn't mean you don't use your mind. I feel like we argue a lot with people about why you believe in God. I think there's scripture that shows you why it's a choice.
Absolutely.
Use your brain. And if somebody thinks you're stupid, we're in the world, but we're not of the world. That's a choice I make. But if I look at myself and I'm not growing, increasing manner in loving kindness and gentleness and self-control and the fruit of the Spirit, my heart's not where it needs to be. And I need to check it.
Absolutely. So, you know, taking the fruit of the Spirit and seeing if that is growing and flourishing in our lives. That's, you know, that's, I was going to say an easy checklist, but it's a challenging checklist, but having that list is easy to access. Joel?
You have a comparative reference that you refer to in our case, that body. We know what the heart needs to be like because it's like you check the blood pressure, you know what you should.
Sure. And you know, metoprolol will only carry me so far. I have, you know, there are things that I do in terms of exercise and discipline to make sure that, you know, I'm keeping my heart at the right strength so that, you know, it's decreasing the likelihood that something bad will happen. Not eliminating it, but decreasing it. And so I think, you know, it comes back to the idea of being deliberate and being disciplined about where our heart is turned. You know, Colossians 3 says to set our minds on things above, right? So it comes back to our brief discussion about spiritual versus carnal or spiritual versus sensual. You know, are we focused on the supernatural in the sense of the things that are beyond the visible world, which is the kingdom of God? Or are we focused on just the day-to-day, the carnal, sensual things of our senses that are going to distract us from, you know, making sure that our hearts are properly tuned and properly focused? Tim?
I think there would be a manifestation of the Spirit if we're following Jesus. And I think our pattern is looking we're spiritual, people are going to see it in our lives. They're going to see by the actions we have toward them, our interest in them. And it's very sobering when we get down and examine our lives, how much result we're getting from our spirit.
I know the second bell rang, but Tim just sparked another thought. Let me get it before I lose it. Can we have a bad spirit but a good heart in God's eyes? Or vice versa, the counterpoint, can we have a good spirit but a bad heart in God's eyes? And this kind of comes back to the discussion about, the need for us to think of these comprehensively or holistically, not as, things that are separate from each other, but as integral components of our spiritual being. Nathan, and then we'll close out. I hate to close out, but
I'm sorry. I'll be real quick, Jay. The Romans chapter 10, Paul does separate zeal from the knowledge of truth with the Jews. He says you have a zeal for God, but you don't through knowledge. Like they don't know the right way. I don't know if that might help some.
no, I think it does, absolutely.
Okay, so Romans chapter 10, first part of it. Go ahead, Jan. I'm sorry.
But just real quick, instead of